Thank you all for joining us at our borough board meeting. I want to thank all of our chairs who are here, and we obviously have some special guests with us who we're going to hop right into. I think I saw, did I see any council members in? Thought I saw I see Councilmember Idenique Miller, Councilmember Barry Grudenchik. We're also joined by Peter Koo. I want to thank them for joining us. So we're gonna jump right into this. Today we have two special guests. I'll start with the Attorney General's office. As head of the Department of Law, the Attorney General is both the people's lawyer and the state's chief legal officer. As the people's lawyer, the Attorney General serves as the guardian of the legal rights of the citizens of New York, its organizations, and its natural resources. And fulfilling the duties of the state's chief legal counsel, the Attorney General not only advises the executive branch of state government, but also defends actions and proceedings on behalf of the state. With us this evening is Michael Barbosa, the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Brooklyn and Queens Regional Office. Assistant Attorney General Barbosa will deliver a presentation that will focus on consumer, civil, and housing rights. And I want to welcome him. I know his office has been extremely busy, and want to always thank our Attorney General, Letitia James, for not just being our state Attorney General, but a real true friend to the people of Queens. Whenever we call, she comes, and I know her office has always been accessible. So I want to thank you for being here. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge Councilmember Peter Koo if I didn't do that as well. So thank you, Mr. Michael Barbosa. You may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Borough President. It's an honor to be here on behalf of our great Attorney General, Letitia James. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. Okay. All right. Like you said, you gave a very good summary of our office, and I represent the Brooklyn and Queens region, and we focus primarily on civil cases, but also some criminal cases. And we all know what our wonderful Attorney General does. She is the living, breathing people's attorney, lawyer on behalf of the entire state of New York. Our authority comes from Executive Law 6312, which authorizes our office to investigate repeated fraud or illegal acts throughout the entire state. And many of our cases that we investigate, we start off in confidential investigations and any violations of local, state, or federal law. And we file summary proceedings, which are basically lawsuits as well. We have limited criminal authority, but we work very closely with the district attorney's offices throughout the counties. So, the Queens district attorney, most of our criminal cases involve financial crimes, fraud, security investment, money laundering. We also have a standing referral with the Medicaid Fraud and Protection involving elderly and disabled individuals in nursing homes, and we have an organized task force. We settle, most of our cases settle, and our primary goal is to provide restitution and refunds to consumers and penalties, and of course, criminal convictions when they warrant, and a various amount of consent orders. And so on our website, if you look at our website, it's again, www.ag.ny.gov. It has, and it's always being updated, especially in light of the past year that we've been with the many different changes. And so it has a just enormous amount of information, and I would encourage you all to continue look at. We also have our press releases in terms of our recent settlement. And today, this is just a overview of some of the different things that our office does. And we continue to do scam prevention presentations, primarily, for senior centers and other areas to try to protect folks. We also do presentations about immigration service provider fraud, and deed fraud presentations. We have an initiative, and again, we publicize. But particularly today, because we are living in this virtual environment, we also wanted to talk about our protecting our community virtual appointments. Because members of the community can't walk into our offices, as one of the regional offices, folks from the community could just walk in and issue complaints, to us. And you can't do that right now. But because of that, but we're still open 5 days a week, 9 to 5. But we're also providing these virtual walk-in appointments. Our next one is tomorrow from 9 to 1. And we have it every 2 weeks. So right now it's Tuesday, March 23rd, and then we have another one on April 6th. And some of the issues that we have been hearing about and doing investigations are, of course, the things that are current in the world right now, COVID-19, and COVID-19 scams, and of course, stimulus check scam, and how to protect yourself from that, or vaccination fraud. And of course, with the pandemic, the moratorium and what are tenants' rights, or immigration fraud, as I said, or identity theft, credit and debit card fraud, and scams affecting the elderly. So, just to talk a little bit about the new eviction moratorium. It's an eviction and foreclosure prevention act. So it not only protects, it only has additional tenants' rights, it also protects homeowners. And just to reiterate just about the importance of filing a hardship declaration, the eviction moratorium and foreclosure prevention act prohibited evictions and filing of most new eviction cases through last week, February, or a few weeks ago, February 26th. And when you file this hardship declaration to the landlord, to a marshal, if you have an existing case, it puts an automatic stay currently through May 1st. So it's important. And this is it applies not only to tenants, but lawful occupants of the household, individuals who've lived in the unit for over 30 days. And there's, it's very broad in terms of the different criteria that you have to put down. But you want to show that your experience, of course, of financial hardship, and that moving would pose a significant health risk, or that, due to COVID-19, you've suffered a substantial loss of significant income or increased expenses. And then this is what the form looks like. It's on the court website, www.newyorkcourts.gov/eviction/NYC. And I'll put, that information also in the chat, along with our, additional information to contact us as well. But this is what the hardship form looks like. I'm sure all of you leaders have copies of these and are giving them out to your members, but it's just important to fill this out and to send it as well. On the court is information, and on the website, it tells you what you need to do. Another thing that we're hearing, of course, is just increase of complaints involving unlawful evictions. Just to reiterate, it's a Class A misdemeanor for a landlord to threaten to change the locks or otherwise force a person from their apartment without a court order. And if that does happen, the most important thing is to call 911. But we also, from the Attorney General's office, want to hear about these types of complaints that are going on in Queens. And it also involves, sometimes it involves roommates or an individual who claims that they are, the lease owner, and they're trying to, push another person, or rooming houses. So it's pretty broad. And just to reiterate that, although that there is a moratorium, it doesn't suspend the obligation to pay the rent. And, it's just a pause. Now, hopefully the stimulus package will be approved, and more additional services can be sent, not only to tenants, but also to homeowners to help folks during this time. And I just wanted to point out that there is, again, that homeowner hardship form that should be, filled out for homeowners. And there's a particular criteria in terms of, the size of small, low-income homeowner, or if you have 10 or less units, it's very clear in terms of who might qualify. And then there's just information on our website, again, about information about tenant rights during COVID-19 and other related tenant scams, and homeowner guidance, and of course, 311. So just going through other complaints that we're looking at and hearing from is immigration service fraud, provider fraud. In light of our new administration, what we see is there's also increasing scam artists that say, okay, now that we have a new administration, I can help you, expedite your paperwork to become a citizen or to be a legal permanent resident. And it's just the same type of reminders of immigration service fraud involving, paying certain fees and not receiving contracts, failure to explain, the process, misrepresenting that they're attorneys or they're actually engaged in an unauthorized practice of law. Individuals who are notaries, notarial fraud, and they're just notarizing documents, but are representing themselves to be attorneys. And of course, all of the labor issues, any type of labor complaints you hear about, we want to hear about, we have a labor bureau, but also our office and, that represents Queens County, investigates workplace rights violations, serious wage and hour violations, misclassifications of independent contractors, sick leave, unequal pay. I mean, it's just, it's so many other legal issues. And then we have our Smart Senior Elderly scam prevention presentations. Daryl White, who's our community outreach liaison, on the call. We can send out these publications. We also have them online. And we always throw this statistic out, 1 in 25 complaints received. We only receive 1, so that means 24 other complaints are not received about abuse and scams. And we do these presentations because we want to hear more. We want the same type of scams always work. Lottery scams, fake check scams, the grandparent scam. I just was on the phone with a family member that fell for this grandparent scam. I mean, a call in the middle of the night. My nephew was injured and he got arrested, and he needs bail. And people know that this. If you're thinking that a family member is hurt, and this person is on the phone with you and they're asking, the only way that we can get help this person is if you send this money right now. And of course, it's in the middle of the night or it's the weekend and certain, offices are closed and wire transfers happen. So we always try to remind people to protect themselves. And of course, there's the do not call. You can be put on the registry to not accept calls, and also learn how to block the calls, or spoofing, calls that you receive. It looks like it's from a legitimate caller, from the IRS, from the New York State Attorney General's office, from Con Ed, and it's not when you pick up the phone. So again, about internet safety, protecting your, important personal identifiable information, your birth certificate, social security, information on social media, or keeping it private, and just shredding important information as well. There's an annual credit report to try to find out, to monitor your credit. And if you are a victim of identity theft, what people need to do, how you have to act fast, file a police report, but also contact our office and the Federal Trade Commission. And with a police report and identity theft affidavit, you have, and also, contacting other individuals about these types of frauds are important. Deed theft is a big problem, and we're still, hearing more and more about elderly owners, having their deeds transferred, forgeries, transfers of particular interests. So, if you hear about these types of complaints, we want to hear about them. The way, scammers find out about this information, because certain information is public. If a person, is in danger of foreclosure, or if they have a tax lien, those types of information are public, and these scam artists scan that information, and they'll contact you and call and act like they're trying to help you when they're not. So it's, we always say the saying, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And source of income discrimination. I mean, there's been so many folks who have been threatened with homelessness, who are homeless, who are living in temporary shelters, and have certain vouchers. There was always already a New York City law, but now it's a New York State law that protects folks against source of income discrimination. And we want to know about those cases. If they qualify, if the voucher is, approved, and they're still receiving certain discriminatory. We have a specific complaint form in our office as well. And charitable giving, people in Queens are very charitable, and we control, we oversee many of the charities in New York State. Our website is www.charitiesnys.com. You can go on this website to see if the charity is registered with our office. If it's not, that's a red flag. There's other information about the charities in terms of their annual reports on here too. So know the charity, know the program, and know that it's registered. I just wanted to stop here again to welcome any questions. And again, our website is www.ag.ny.gov and our 1-800 hotline. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. And I guess we'll stop sharing your screen, or can you stop sharing it, and we'll get to the district. Okay, perfect. So we'll start with, I guess I'll go to my colleagues. I don't know if they have questions, but if you have questions, just if you could raise your hand, hit the raise your hand function, that would be good. If not, just send it over to the staff and I will get to you. I just wanted to ask on two different things. Foreclosures. Now we're anticipating, obviously, with this economy, that we're going to be dealing with challenges around foreclosures and scams, especially deed fraud. So how are you working towards ensuring, everyday Queens residents know what to do and what not to do? Who should people call if they have any challenges? What should they know? And then the second question I had is, and I was on a conference call late last week, and it seems to be a lot of scams targeting undocumented folks as well. And actually, my wife got it. My wife got one of those calls last week too. But thank God she now, she talked to me. But just wanted to know, what should people do in the event they're being targeted, and how are you working through, I guess, the communities, especially immigrant communities? How are you working with community-based organizations and others to make sure?
Sure, of course. So again, I think the most important our office does is our outreach in terms of the scams, in terms of our lawsuits that we have and investigations. We also partner with the homeowner protection program. With a list of legal services providers, because again, at the Attorney General's office, we don't provide direct representation if a person is in danger of foreclosure. But if they are alleging fraud or misrepresentation, if there are agencies that promise to help them, and are charging advanced fees, those are the different things that we want to know about. If they're not receiving certain notices, like for instance, now with the change in the law with the eviction, the hardship notice, that should also be part of the pre-foreclosure notices that a homeowner should receive. In addition to other, information about legal service providers, listed providers and certain things like that. So it's basically just filing complaints with our office, contacting us as soon as you can. one of the problems that we always find is that we find out so much later. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, but one of the good things is, as the Attorney General's office, we can look back 2, 3, 4, or even in some cases 6 years in advance. And it involves people who died, and deeds have not been filed, or they were filed improperly, which is also important in terms of just making sure that homeowners register to receive certain notifications, and always check to see if their listed address hasn't been changed. So it's basically those types of things, and we'll, and it could also be anonymous tips too, because sometimes people are fearful, to give their information, but we'll take whatever leads that we can. Of course, if we have, sworn complaints, it's stronger, or certain documents or other things to support what they think that's going on. But we'll look at everything, and because it's confidential investigation, sometimes you might know what we're doing with it, but just know that we're working on it.
Thank you. Okay, I'll go to questions from any of the chairs. Any questions? All right, you got the Attorney General's office on the line yet. No questions?
I'm sorry to jump in for a minute. We also, Mr. Borough President, we also have our intergov person with us on the Zoom today.
Hello.
Monica Ben. Yeah, I'm sure there's some folks on this. Hey, Monica.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say hello. And
Hey, Monica.
hi. I'm happy to be a resource for anyone. And, just to piggyback on some of the things that Mr. Barbosa shared about deed theft, we do hope to be bringing additional resources and outreach activities to Queens. It is something that we're working on right now, so we probably will be launching in Southeast Queens to bring more resources. And I look forward to being, always available to all of you. So thank you for having me, and I always enjoy being part of these things, so thank you.
Thank you. And way to balance doing that with kids in the back. I know about that. That's why I do all these meetings from the office. So good job, Monica, getting through that.
No, kids. That was theater. It was theater in the background, just theater.
Okay. All righty. And Monica's a great resource, so y'all should know if in the event, you have questions around tenants and landlords and building owners harassing, and the AG's office can investigate these things. So I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware. Are there any other questions for them? Your job is easy tonight. I mean, I got more questions, but I know how to find you. So I won't hold up everybody's time tonight. But I want to thank you, Mr. Barbosa, and thank you for being a resource. And I do want to thank Tish once again, because prior to the pandemic, we were actually working on like a big initiative with Monica around the deed fraud, the foreclosure, the scams. And I look forward to making sure we get back to hosting that once things are safe again. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. You take care.
Thank you. All right, we now will turn to the Mitchell-Lama United. The Mitchell-Lama program provides affordable rental and cooperative housing to moderate and middle income families. The program was sponsored by New York State Senator McNeil Mitchell and Assemblyman Alfred Lama, and was signed into law in 1955. They are both New York City supervised Mitchell-Lama developments. I used to live in one actually, which was Ocean Village, and New York State supervised Mitchell-Lama developments. With us this evening is Warren Harding, chairperson of the steering committee for Mitchell-Lama United. Mr. Harding will deliver a presentation on protecting and preserving the Mitchell-Lama program, which does have its challenges, especially as they start to transfer over some of these programs to the city, to HPD and others. And I spoke of Ocean Village, which is now Arvin, which is one of those cases. With that being said, I want to welcome Mr. Harding, and you may begin. Thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Borough President. And just give me a moment to share my screen and we'll get started. All right, and second. Okay. Here we go. Okay. All right. Well, once again, I thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to you and the entire Borough Board for this meeting. And my name is Warren Harding. I do chair the steering committee of Mitchell-Lama United. And it is a partnership of 3 Mitchell-Lama advocacy groups, the Brooklyn Mitchell-Lama Task Force, Cooperators United for Mitchell-Lama, and the Mitchell-Lama Residents Coalition. And while each organization exists independently, we formed this coalition back in February of last year as an umbrella organization advocating to preserve and protect Mitchell-Lama developments for both co-ops and rentals. And as a means for that advocacy, we are seeking to build support for an agenda based on organizing legislative initiatives that would impede privatization and also good governance. And we also have a Gmail account, as you can see at the bottom of this slide, for anyone who wishes to contact us, which is mitchell-lama-united@gmail.com. So our topics for this presentation will include the following: the importance of Mitchell-Lama, how Mitchell-Lama works, threats to the program, and our proposed state legislation, and also how preserving and expanding the Mitchell-Lama program advances the affirmatively furthering fair housing efforts that are underway in New York City through the Where We Live New York program. And now I will hand things over to our my partner speaker here, Richard Heitler, to go through these topics. So Dick, it's all yours.
Okay, Warren, but I was under the impression, go to the next slide. I was under the impression that you were going to do these.
You know what? You're absolutely right. let me continue.
Okay.
So my mind was on the old version of this. Now, some of the reasons that the Mitchell-Lama program is considered a good deal are that, first, operating costs tend to be lower due to the benefits such as an exemption from paying regular real estate taxes, whereas Mitchell-Lama developments pay what's called a shelter rent tax that is approximately 15% of the regular tax rate. And also monthly charges are usually below market rate, or below market, and the equity amount or price of the apartment shares is below market rate. Therefore, apartment sales become attractive to middle income people. And also the economics is sound because Mitchell-Lamas generally operate with a balanced budget, thereby making it easy to predict operating costs for a number of years in the future. And because of the lower operating costs in Mitchell-Lamas, you save money every month. Lower purchase prices mean you're more likely not to have mortgage payments. And then also because Mitchell-Lama co-ops are nonprofit, they're inherently fair because the monthly charges cover the costs of operation and maintenance and are shared equally by all shareholders. And these benefits are possible because of the not-for-profit characteristics of the Mitchell-Lama program. Now, if there's a catch to any of this, it's that you won't make a lot of money when you sell your apartment. As you see here, typical Mitchell-Lama shares in a 3-bedroom apartment costs $4,305 in 1975, and as of 2020, the price would be about $32,000. But because of the overall lower cost of living in Mitchell-Lama over a period of time, it's still a great deal. Now, here's some other factors to consider that to make Mitchell-Lama a great deal. By the inherent cost savings from living in a Mitchell-Lama development, shareholders save thousands of dollars a month. And this is particularly beneficial for young people coming out of college who want to start out on their own and invest in home ownership, as well as single-headed households who typically have limited income. And also your savings accumulate over time, thereby helping you to live better right now in the present. Furthermore, the low cost of Mitchell-Lamas are not only benefits the current residents, but also future purchasers because of the apartment's affordability. Also, your accumulated savings can be used for other investments, such as your children's education, saving for another home. So that is the Mitchell-Lama deal. And most importantly, your economic benefit comes while you live there, not when you leave. Now, some people living in Mitchell-Lamas for many years may argue that they had invested in their residences when the neighborhood was less desirable and deserve a return on their investment, particularly in an environment of redlining and discrimination. But while that point of view may have merit, it's important to remember that the Mitchell-Lama program was not designed for wealth accumulation. It's a return of your investment rather than a return on your investment. And it also serves as a remedy for past segregation because it fosters integrated housing that is affordable and secure. Meanwhile, it counters gentrification, which generally forces out people of color and increases segregation. Okay, now I will turn things over to Dick Heitler to talk about his piece of the presentation.
Great. And I want to talk a little bit about Rosalie Manning as an example, one of many of the points that Warren just made. We picked Rosalie Manning because it's the site of a recent victory. A group of residents at Rosalie Manning, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, beat back a privatization attempt. They formed an organization called Keep Our Building Affordable, COBA. They defeated the privatization effort, and then they went on, and in the course of 2 election cycles, they have completely taken over the board, and they are strong supporters and preservationists of the Mitchell-Lama program, and of course, they've opened their waiting list. And this waiting list, and I'm sure you see ads in your local papers like this all the time, is illustrative of exactly why Mitchell-Lama is such a great deal. Warren, go to the next one. If you couldn't read the fine print on the scan of the ad, take a look at these. This is a monthly charge comparison of Rosalie Manning to Stuyvesant Town, which also used to at one point be housing for working families and middle-income people. Basically, Stuyvesant Town, since it's gone, is 4 times or more, 5 times as expensive. The next slide, Warren. I think everybody knows that Mitchell-Lama is a great deal financially. A lot fewer people know actually how this is accomplished. And it is a really brilliantly designed program. We have a much longer presentation that we offer called What Makes Mitchell-Lama Co-op So Great, which goes into this in detail. It is summarized on this slide. The first 4 bullets on the slide describe government interventions, low-cost lands, very favorably financed, low-interest mortgages, and of course, what Warren already mentioned, the real estate tax abatements, which can be up to an 80% cut in that operating cost. Surcharges is an interesting piece of social engineering. You must be income eligible when you move into a Mitchell-Lama. If you do a little better over time, you don't have to leave, you just have to pay more. You pay a little bit more into the general operating fund of the co-op. But the most important bullet on this slide is the last one, not-for-profit operation, which Warren alluded to. In a Mitchell-Lama co-op, you will have to pay your fair share of what it actually costs to operate and maintain the building, and not a penny more, but also not a penny less. And when it comes time to sell, you'll get back what you paid in, but you won't ever make a killing. Next slide. These are the sales prices at Rosalie Manning. Again, taken from that ad that I showed you earlier. 43,000, take a look at the 2-bedroom, 53,176. This is in a neighborhood where apartments no better than these routinely sell for more than $1 million. Next slide. This excellent program, as the borough president mentioned, is under threat. And one of those threats is privatization. Another one, which people may be less familiar with, are conversions from Article 2, the Mitchell-Lama law, to Article 11, the HDFC Housing Development Fund Corporation, which we'll talk about later. A lot of Mitchell-Lamas are struggling because of COVID, sometimes from board malfeasance. When rental Mitchell-Lamas are lost, the rents can skyrocket, and in many of these cases, government oversight is not quite as good as it ought to be. But this next slide, Warren, shows the stats. And the stats are interesting. You may hear from time to time people say, oh, the Mitchell-Lamas, they're all gone. Pretty soon there's not going to be any left. This is only true of the rentals. If you look, almost 2/3 of the rentals are gone, but less than 10% of the co-ops are gone. A grand total of 7 have opted to privatize. Another 65 more have decided to remain in the program. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to make. There's an explanation for it. If you're interested, ask me a question in the Q&A. But we'll go on to the next slide. Rental tenants, which are most of the privatization takes place, really get hurt badly. Some of them are not eligible for rent stabilization. And even those that are will find that their monthly charges will go up much faster because of major capital improvements. And then they lose a lot of other benefits that they had as a Mitchell-Lama. You know, when your family size changes, you can move within the development very inexpensively. That is lost once the rental goes private. And if you are one of the unfortunate tenants who privatize into in a building that is not eligible for rent stabilization, you'll also lose scree and dree. So it's a disaster. Next slide. The optimistic slide. Cooperators United for Mitchell-Lama has been fighting this fight for about 11 years, and we are winning more than we lose. Rosalie Manning is up there, but along with Cadman Towers and East Midtown and Rupert House, well, you can read them yourself. Basically, we offer a package of services to residents in Mitchell-Lama co-ops who are fighting privatization. Information services, organizing services, technical assistance services, and mostly we win. And in many cases where we win, as in Rosalie Manning, the victors go on to take over the board, and we get, as a result, a really solid Mitchell-Lama co-op coming out the other side. But we do lose a few. The next slide is the story of one that we lost. Southbridge Towers went private in September of 2015. It is now underwater. 5 years later, their current FY 2020 budget is $7 million short, and they have just instituted an operating assessment of about $4,000 an apartment, which needs to get paid in over a 5-month period between February and June to close the gap. And then next year, they will be facing a $5 million shortfall, which will probably mean that they will either have to cut services in some way, or they're looking at a 40% increase in maintenance charges. How did this happen? It's a long story. I'm going to give you the brief version in a grand total of 2 slides. Here's one of them. Everybody agrees that when a building leaves the Mitchell-Lama program and goes private, its operating costs will increase because they lose the tax break, they lose the government subsidized loan, they lose surcharge income. In the case of Southbridge, their taxes as a Mitchell-Lama were $1.6 million a year. Bear in mind that this is a big co-op, 1,650 units. The first year of privatization, that tax bill went up to $8.3 million. In the 5 years since, it's gone from $8.3 million to $16.5 million. And if you can see the graph, you can see that as the taxes went up, the orange line, income from flip taxes went down. The theory of privatization is you'll sell so many apartments for hundreds of thousands of dollars that if the co-op takes, in the case of Southbridge, 28%, you'll close the budget gap. Good theory, didn't work. Next slide. instead of just comparing the two numbers of flip tax income versus taxes, this slide looks at the whole budget. They went into deficit in the third year. They had a better fourth year, and then they're back into deficit again in year 5. And that's a problem. One of the problems, which nobody ever talked about, was banks will not write mortgages for people seeking to purchase at Southbridge because they can't sell them on the secondary market. They violate the standards sent by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and HUD. The co-op must be operating in the black in order for any of those secondary market players to write to buy the mortgages from the bank. So the banks have stopped writing mortgages in Southbridge, and if there are no mortgages, there are no sales, and if there are no sales, then there are no flip taxes, and if there are no flip taxes, the whole house of cards collapses. And so what I want to say is, we lost Southbridge. It's tragic. We won 14 times, and it's been great. But we shouldn't have to fight this fight one building at a time. There are better solutions, and those solutions are political and legislative in nature. So I pass the torch back to Warren, who will tell you about them.
Okay, thanks, Dick. Yeah, so what I'll talk about now is some of our legislative objectives, as I mentioned in our introduction of one of our activities. And one of the things that we did was develop a white paper called Legislative and Policy Recommendations for Mitchell-Lama Housing, which describes the organization, the Mitchell-Lama program for both co-ops and rentals, and it provides justifications and recommendations for preserving the Mitchell-Lama program. And among those recommendations in the white paper are legislative in nature that resulted in some written bills focusing on, number one, impeding the privatization process so that it becomes exceedingly difficult to reconstitute. And second, ensuring good governance in the operation and management of our buildings. And hang on. Here we go. Okay, now here are some of the bills that have been drafted. We don't have time today to review each one of these, but we just want you to know that at least some of them have multiple sponsors and are being taken seriously in Albany. And further, we want to mention a letter of support was signed by 14 members of the City Council back in last summer, and we're looking forward to additional grassroots support. That's why we're here today, to try to get your support as well. Now, here are some of the bills that we'll take a look at. Now, the components of this particular bill, I just want to talk a little about the first two and how we arrived at the 80% figure. We're seeking to amend the law to an 80% threshold because it's consistent. I beg your pardon? Oh, we wanted to amend the law to an 80% threshold, which is consistent with what HPD requires for the creation of an Article 11, which we'll talk about in more detail a little bit later, of an Article 11 co-op, which they also sponsor. And this particular bill addresses the issues of good governance that I had mentioned as one of our main goals in our legislative recommendations. Now, this bill also pertains to good governance, covering issues such as the frequency of board meetings with shareholders and the transparency in board member votes. And that way it provides an opportunity for the shareholders to see whether a board member's vote represents their interests and thereby merits their vote and support in board elections. And this bill is another one that affects co-ops in particular, and we spoke about shelter rent a little bit earlier. Okay, now this bill, or these bills actually are for the benefit of both co-ops and rentals because it affects sales profits and transfer fees and other things of that nature. And now, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, The steering committee sent a letter to the elected officials and friends of Mitchell-Lama requesting relief measures during the emergency. And one of the results of that letter was this bill drafted and submitted by Assembly member Linda Rosenthal. And it places a moratorium on all steps towards privatization and semi-privatization, including the expenditure of funds during the pandemic and for 2 years following its conclusion. And we felt that no one should be making long-term decisions about our homes in the middle of a pandemic. And that concludes the legislative portion of the presentation. So I will hand it over back to Dick to discuss the next segment. Thanks. Hey, Dick, it's all yours. Dick, can you hear us?
I think you're muted. You're muted.
Okay.
He is unmuted, so.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking.
All right. Let's see if I can get his attention.
Got it. I got it. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. Sorry for that.
All right.
Again, this is the numbers heavy part of the presentation. This is not a state legislative problem. This is a New York City problem. HPD did this to us all by themselves through a rule change. They made it possible, maybe even grease the wheels in an attempt to make it easy for a Mitchell-Lama co-op to turn itself into an Article 2 HDFC, Housing Development Fund, cooperative. And their argument is, well, you know, what's the difference? Mitchell-Lama's HDFCs, they're both affordable. And the answer is they are not equally affordable. We at Mitchell-Lama United refer to Article 11 conversions as Mitchell-Lama Light. Let's go to the next slide. And again, the devil is in the details. So before I get into the details, I have to make one important point. This has been out there for about 5 years and not a single Mitchell-Lama co-op has yet taken the deal. What we have, what our data is based on are offerings that HPD and HDC have made to various co-ops. And this is the offer that they made to Rosalie Manning, who never wanted it in the first place, but they made the offer anyway. Check it out. For those of you who are coming in by phone, I apologize, but the numbers speak for themselves. This is what happens to the purchase price of apartments if it goes from Mitchell-Lama to Article 11. I'll just read one of them. A 2-bedroom, which now goes for about $45,500, would jump to $533,000. Essentially, prices increase depending on what size unit, anywhere from 10 to 19 times. And what does this mean, Warren? Let's go to the next one. Even if the maintenance charges stayed the same, because most people buying a $500,000 apartment would have to get a mortgage, mortgage payments would cause their monthly housing costs in most cases to triple. And what does that do to affordability? Well, this is what you need: $46,000 to be able to live in a 2-bedroom Mitchell-Lama, but you'd need $140,000 to live in a two-bedroom Article 11. This is my favorite analysis. We went and got information from the Bureau of Labor Statistics on average salaries for the people who actually live in Mitchell-Lama co-ops: social workers, teachers, nurses, electricians, mail carriers, subway operators. And we looked at these salaries for a single income family living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Go to the next one, Warren. They can all afford it. They can all afford it, and that's why we use the color green for this column. It's a go, and the number in that column is, in fact, their surplus. If it becomes an Article 11, the next slide, none of them could afford to live there. Basically, everybody on the current Rosalie Manning waiting list would be priced out if the building went to Article 11, and by a lot. Oh, you've seen this. Let's blow it up again. On the next slide, Warren, next one after this. For those of you who like to think in terms of area median income, in a Mitchell-Lama, the band of affordability is very broad, from 28% AMI, some of the smallest studios, up to 120 AMI, which is the legal maximum.
I'm gonna
If
ask
it
you
went
to, I'm gonna
Article
ask you
11,
to start to, so, because I want to get the question that I, so if you could.
Okay, I got you. Basically, it cuts off the bottom of the income band. And if you look at it by race and ethnicity, it disproportionately cuts off people of color. And that's the end of my part of this. I'm going to pass the ball to Andrea Rudner, who will talk about fair housing.
Hi, everybody. So the figures that Dick just showed you lead us into a discussion of fair housing. And the concept of fair housing is that everyone should be able to choose the housing that's best for their family, free from discrimination because of their gender, color, disability status, age, etc. But it's more than this, actually. There have been discriminatory practices by individual landlords, and these are widespread. But as we mentioned earlier, also widespread has been the deliberate disinvestment in communities of color by government and industry historically through practices like redlining. And this includes things like denial of services, for instance, importantly, when you're talking about housing, mortgage financing to residents of certain neighborhoods, and these have historically been communities of color. So the Fair Housing Act was finally passed in 1968, spurred by the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it had as its dual purpose both to end all these discriminatory housing practices, but also to reverse the residential segregation that had been brought about by all these unjust and racist government and industry practices. And a part of the Fair Housing Act is something known as Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or AFFH. And this is a mandate, and it was strengthened by Obama and is now currently, or was being dismantled by Trump, hopefully to be reinvigorated. And what it does is it requires municipalities who receive HUD funds to actually demonstrate that they're taking successful action to undo these longstanding patterns of segregation, and that they are creating access to better housing and education and opportunity for people who have been historically denied these things. And a policy or practice is said to have a disparate impact when it has a discriminatory effect on any protected class. And protected classes are things like sex and race and disability status. And this is regardless of whether there was any intention to discriminate. So the Mitchell-Lama housing program embodies fair housing principles, and destroying it either through privatizing or pushing 2 to 11 will exacerbate the segregation and inequity that we're already experiencing in New York City. Next slide, please. So as Dick showed you, the 2 to 11 policy cuts out the lower 2/3 of the Mitchell-Lama eligibility band. And because of the income disparity in New York City and in the US generally, what it therefore does is it has a disparate impact on people of color, disabled people, single parent households, and others in protected classes. So clearly the city and state ought to be promoting policies that don't have a disparate impact and that actively work towards desegregation of our city rather than causing more segregation. Next slide, please. So you can read these quotes and you can see that quite interestingly, this is precisely what the city and state claim they're trying to do with their AFFH initiatives. So many municipalities vowed to uphold AFFH even while Trump was dismantling it, and they launched these major initiatives to do so. New York State's effort is called Housing Matters New York. And what they aim to do is address the root causes of segregation. And you can see that they understand that segregation causes inequities beyond living situation and access to employment, to education, quality health care, and many other things. Next slide, please. This is the city's plan. It's called the Where We Live New York Plan. And likewise, you can see from their quote that they get that the lack of affordable housing disproportionately affects people of color, people with disabilities, and other protected classes. But the problem here is that this 2 to 11 policy, in which HPD has not only enabled these conversions, but they are continually and actively encouraging them. This is even in cooperatives, which we have seen, which are not under threat of privatization. Originally, HPD's rationale was that this was supposed to be a compromise to try to prevent privatization. So you wouldn't think that they would offer it to places that have already prevented privatization, but that is exactly what they do. And this flies in the face of everything the city claims it's trying to do in its AFFH initiative. So these conversions will have a discriminatory effect on protected classes, especially as we have seen from the data presented on non-white New Yorkers, very few of whom will be able to afford the converted apartments. These conversions will limit the choices of people of color and their access to quality living conditions and neighborhoods with good schools and other critical resources. Also, the original Mitchell-Lama law did not have a buyout provision. It was the Rockefeller Amendment which enabled privatization. And this modification of the statute also had a disparate impact on people of color. This is precisely why Mitchell-Lama United is intent on passing legislation to restore the law to its original 1955 form. So if the city and state truly wish to counter systemic racism and segregation, next slide, please.
Can I actually start the wrap up because we got to get to questions.
This is almost at the end.
All right.
I think this is my last slide. They need look no further than the Mitchell-Lama housing program. And this is where we come to how this Mitchell-Lama model of not-for-profit housing, where housing is seen as a human need rather than a speculative investment, works in perpetuity because no one makes a profit. So the price does not continue to escalate and the cost to new families stays truly affordable. It's diverse, it's affordable, it's accessible. It contributes to housing stability and neighborhood stability. It's accessed, importantly, via government supervised waiting lists, which under normal operation preclude the discriminatory practices that are rampant in market and other housing models. And Mitchell-Lama housing cooperators are owners and they have autonomy over their living conditions, and they often become NORCs where seniors can age in place. So Mitchell-Lama has, at its best, been this integrated housing that New York City and state insist they want. The Mitchell-Lama program has worked towards erasing the barriers of segregation. And when you bring people together in these communities, all of a sudden they can see that they're very much the same when it comes to their wishes and needs for housing, schools, childcare, and other resources, and just their general well-being. So the city and state are on record saying they'll take affirmative steps to desegregate, but to actually affirmatively desegregate, they need to invest in the kinds of programs that embody the city that they say they wish to create. So the vigorous defense of the Mitchell-Lama program would contribute significantly towards the eradication of the devastating inequities that accompany New York City's longstanding patterns of segregated housing. And if they took substantive action to protect and preserve Mitchell-Lamas from both privatization and 2 to 11 conversions, then this would be a very good start.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask you to.
Okay, sure.
So if there's no points you've made, if you made some of those points, let us get the questions because I got that.
Okay.
All righty. So I'm going to go to questions from any of the chairs. Dolores, no? Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
So I guess my question is, why wouldn't the city, instead of with their current affordable plan for building, why wouldn't they introduce and fund a Mitchell-Lama program where home ownership in single family, 2-family homes is difficult for many, but a Mitchell-Lama co-op is attainable for so many more. So why wouldn't New York City fund a Mitchell-Lama co-op program?
Well, I think that's part of what our efforts are to try to sort of reintroduce the Mitchell-Lama program to the powers that be, because although it's still in existence, I think it hasn't been really given the attention that it deserves. And that's why we're working with the legislative body to try to enact some of these bills to say that we're still around, it still exists, it's still a good program. I don't know if anyone else on the steering committee has any additional comments to make, but I mean, that's.
Yeah, let me just say, in Rockaway, we have 3 Mitchell-Lama co-ops. It's about 3,200 units of housing. And there was an attempt to move from an Article 2 to 11 in one of those co-ops.
Was it Nordac, Dolores? I can't
No,
remember.
that was Dayton Beach Park.
Oh, Dayton, right.
And thankfully, it's quiet at the moment. We're not quite sure why, but that's the way they would like it to stay, is quiet and not happen.
Right. In fact, some of the cooperators from that development are participating in one of our sister organizations, Cooperators United for Mitchell-Lama. So
Yeah, I think both Dayton Beach and Dayton Towers.
Yeah, right.
We have members at both places.
Yeah.
And elected board members at Dayton Towers. And Adele Niederman, who's also on the call, we made presentations at Dayton Beach.
Right.
So what can community boards do to help further the cause of home ownership through Mitchell-Lama co-ops?
You took my question. What do you want us to do?
We have a couple of things we can do. We appealed to the Borough Board to provide something in the way of a support letter or a resolution that would support our legislation. We spoke with the Brooklyn Borough Board. They submitted a resolution, and I can send you a draft of that for you to review and vote on. And the resolution basically covers 3 main areas: to support our legislation pending in Albany, to limit the maximum extent possible privatization of Mitchell-Lama developments, and to support the suspension of all privatization processes until the COVID-19 pandemic is over, and also prioritize the development of Mitchell-Lamas to the greatest extent possible. So those are the 3 main themes of this resolution, and I would be happy to, share what we've.
Now, now on that, and I guess this is my question, how many Queens Mitchell-Lamas are under threat as to your knowledge?
That's a good question.
Not that I'm saying I don't care about the rest of the city.
Yeah, right.
But
we do have that data buried somewhere, and I'm sorry I don't have that up.
If you can get that to us, that would
yeah, I'll certainly send that to you. Sure.
I would have to say, with Julie Wopart continuing to be the assistant commissioner in charge of Mitchell-Lamas, the threat is to every building.
Okay.
I think, Dolores, you were correct in saying that the most active threat was Dayton Beach Tower, and for the time being, that is in Queens. That seems to be under control. And as to your other issue, we strongly support the notion of a Mitchell-Lama 2.0. The law is still on the books, but it has never received any funding. And again,
state funding. You're talking about state funding, right?
Unfortunately, the law is a state law, and
Right.
I'm not quite sure, Mr. Borough President, how the city would do this on its own.
Right, because it's state law, right?
Right.
Thank you.
And whatever the state lets out for their portfolio, then the city takes and they convert to an Article 11. And, and I know Ocean Village was one of those, Arvindview now is one of those places. And we did a lot of work to try to preserve the affordability, and which we did. I mean, I want to say that there's been, I have an aunt that lives there. My grandfather literally died there. So I think relatively it's been okay, but it took a real watchful eye on our part to make sure that the rents weren't going to increase. And there was a scare definitely during that conversion period where we had to have legal aid and others on site. I just remember this whole conversion. Dolores, I'm not sure if you remember, L&M purchased the building right before Sandy.
Yes,
Sandy hits a week later when they closed. And it was so much because I think on some of the rents, like for instance, the jack up on the rents you were talking about, the city did pick up a sizable portion of that, I think through the Article 11, but there were letters that were like sent to tenants that your rent is going up like 3 times, even though it wasn't the case, but they did see some relatively minor rent increases, which are minor, but can really hurt somebody who's living on the margins, obviously. So, so that was a fight. So I'm definitely with you on this. So you're saying that if there were things that we could do, you would want us to pass perhaps pass a resolution if I'm getting to what the purpose of is today.
Yes,
Okay.
that'd be great.
Any other questions from, okay, Lisa, go ahead. Alrighty.
Hi.
Hi.
So yeah, I just had to unmute. Thank you, Borough President. The question I have 2 questions, maybe 3 questions. One is Mitchell-Lama is dependent on low-cost land, correct? So it's like city-owned land. You couldn't do Mitchell-Lama on anything because it would be too expensive, right?
Historically, that is correct. It was built on city-owned land, urban renewal. Yes.
And the second question is, it's
a co-op city, of course, as you know, used to be a theme park, and so not always, but usually, yes.
And Dick, the motivation for the shift from the shelter rent to Article 11 you're saying it came from HPD or it came from the owners? Like, where did
it came from HPD working with the Attorney General because they thought they needed a compromise. They thought that they doubted our ability to defeat privatization most of the time, and they thought they were going to. And so rather than lose a co-op to full-scale privatization, they thought they would offer this middle.
Yeah, and let me add to that, because I lived in Ocean Village, so I know what those conditions were, and they were horrible. So the fact was that there was just not enough investment coming, I think, from the state at that portion, from that moment. And I think, sort of, as you explained, Richard, was sort of like a compromise. How do we preserve the affordable housing? But of course, who doesn't want a Mitchell-Lama? I mean, the rents are great. But it came to a point where it was such disrepair, where I couldn't even get hot water on many mornings in the winter. And I'm not saying it's perfect now, because it's still far from perfect now, but it's much better than what it was. So I think that sort of was the premise of HPD getting involved and sort of, being creative with the funding streams and doing the Article 11.
And I'm going to agree with you and say that I think I actually worked for an organization. I worked for 15 years with UHEB, and we created Article 11 HDFC co-ops. So I'm not against them. And I think, Mr. Borough President, it's a very good option for Mitchell-Lama rentals. If you have a rental that's in bad shape, suffering from disinvestment, and you can get a good owner to come in and create an Article 11 rental, great.
Yep.
But
it's not that case.
For co-ops, it's just a step in the wrong direction.
Right. Go ahead, Lisa, did you have one more? Or you forgot?
No. You made the, so the last question is, so are they, like, by definition, failed co-ops or distressed co-ops? Like, some are more successful than others.
I think an Article 11 rental is a great solution to a failed rental, where most of the co-ops are doing just fine. And as a matter of fact, it's some of the most successful co-ops are pursuing privatization because people who have no interest in Mitchell-Lama run for the board. They get a pro-privatization majority on the board. Then all of a sudden they have all the resources of the co-op, to hire lawyers and accountants and appraisers and to push through a privatization policy. And they're not struggling. Southbridge was doing just fine until it privatized. That, you know where it is. It's right near HPD.
Oh,
it's right near the
Southbridge Seaport.
Next door, sort of.
To the seaport.
They have commercial tenants. They have parking garages. They have solar panels on the roof. They were great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I say something about that, which is just that, Originally, HPD saw this as a compromise, so-called compromise, even though it's really an awful idea. But what happens is that we, CU4ML and others, defeat privatization at these places. And then the city comes in with this offer for 2 to 11 as kind of a consolation prize. So it's not being used as a compromise. It's being used after we've gone ahead and defeated privatization.
Right.
So,
Like that. Well said. Well said. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your presentation. I think that this is important because not enough people are speaking about Mitchell-Lamas and community land trust, which was my bill in the city council, which was which passed, which enabled HPD to recognize community land trust in the city. So I see these as two vehicles to really preserve ownership and affordability, and we have to have that conversation about upward mobility because we know that comes from ownership as well. Not easy conversation because everybody's like, why don't you just do home ownership? But the city's they're not really investing in that. But I do think the future of community land trusts and God willing, Rockaways will actually be the model. I'm gonna make Dolores' head spin a little bit because we're building more housing, but we are working on a plan to actually do some affordable home ownership out there, which is very rare in this day and age. The advantage we have is we have 80 acres of land to play with, so we can be creative and sort of the mix uses on the site. But but we need to be able to continue to have these conversations. The other thing I want to talk about briefly too, and this is something we could think about too. I don't know if Councilmember Miller's on still, but we went to Washington D.C. in 2014 to lobby for something called the foreclosure buyback program, in which Queens was actually, Queens in the Bronx, and we won, were the pilot places in the country where we bought back foreclosed properties and then turned them over to perhaps Neighborhood Restore or Habitat for Humanity and put those homes back on the market for affordable home ownership. So that's something that I think we can now revisit. We could not scream as loudly about it when Trump was in. I hate to get political because we thought he would eliminate the entire program. But now that the Biden administration is back, I think there's some room to start to have this conversation again and revisit, all of these things. But it also comes down to, I just want to be clear, funding. Like, we got to make sure the Mitchell-Lama program is funded at the state level. That's the way you do it. And if the city wants to do it, so be it too. But I just know they're all going to point the finger at each other. It's a state program, state law. The state should fund it. So we just have to figure out how to navigate that. But I would be more than open to doing a letter or a resolution in support of preserving Mitchell-Lamas because I saw what it did for my family. A lot of residents in the Rockaways who were able to, who are still able to, and live in a real affordable environment as gentrification pops up around Queens. So I want to thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for your support. We'll be in touch.
Alrighty.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All righty. Carolina, am I done? I think I am. So that's all our presentation, unless there's any other things. I know we have y'all. Are there any things?
That's all BP. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Perfect. Are there any other comments, questions, or announcements any of the chairs want to make before we wrap up? Anything going on you want people to know about? Okay. No? Seeing none? All righty. Well, I want to thank you all for attending our Borough Board meeting, the first one in March. Happy Women's History Month. And, looking on this line, I see a whole bunch of powerful women who are running our community boards. I'm very happy to see that. And I want to wish y'all all a happy Women's Month, even though Women's Day is every day of the year. But we want to wish you and thank you for making history here in Queens. So thank you all for attending. We'll see you the next time.